This conference will now be recorded.
Well, thank you, Stephen. Thank you for reminding me. You said it and I forgot it. So welcome everybody, now that we're recording the session. Welcome to the June 2021 webinar from the ITE National Capital section, the panel discussion on transportation equity. Thank you so much for signing up and joining us here today. I think this is a really important topic and some really interesting conversations that we're going to be having with transportation leaders from across the country. So we're very excited to have you join us. I want to say, you know, as we start off, of course, thank you to our sponsors, without whom this event would not have been possible. We really appreciate your support. And on the note of appreciating support, I just want to share some exciting news from our section. We are very humbled and very grateful to have been selected as the Canadian District's winners for this year's Section Momentum Award, which was awarded earlier this month in the virtual conference. So we are very excited. So we want to just give a huge thank you to all of our volunteers, our current executive, our past executive, everybody who was able to make this possible. As well as to all of our members who've supported our events and who continue to attend these. So we are very excited to keep building on, as the name of this award states, on the momentum that we've had, and we hope that we are able to deliver more exciting content that is beneficial and interesting to you in the future. I do want to note that we are using a different platform today. So if you haven't joined us earlier this year, as we've been doing webinars, this may be a little bit unfamiliar. In the past, we've used GoToWebinar. So there's just a quick overview of how to use this if you are not familiar with it. I do want to remind everybody that just like all the other webinars, we are recording this session. So please make sure, if you do not want to be recorded, you probably won't show up if you're not making any noise, but if you don't want to get recorded, make sure that your camera is kept off. Also, please try to help keep the sound clear for our audience, so make sure that you are muted. If you want to change the view, there is in the middle top, there is a little button that you can press to change what you're seeing. We are encouraging you to please ask our panelists questions as they are presenting in the first part of this event. So if you have questions, please put them into the chat bar, which is a little speech bubble in the top right. And if you are encountering any technical difficulties, I'd recommend playing around with the gear and seeing if your audio inputs, especially if it has to do with audio or video, if all of those are correct. You can always try leaving and rejoining again to see if that makes things better. And if you're still having issues, you can send a quick SOS into the chat bar, same thing as the questions. And Stephen Gardner from CITE, who is here helping us out today, or I will try to address that and make sure we can get you going. So as I mentioned, for the questions, we'll be answering the questions at the end of all of the presentations. So I'll be moderating that session later in the event. So please add them in as they come up, and we'll make sure to try and answer them as we keep going. Okay, so for the agenda today, we have, I'm going to go through introductions. I've done a little bit of that already. I'm going to go through the introductions today. And then we're going to have some quick 10-minute presentations from our panelists on different aspects of transportation equity. And then we're going to open it to a Q&A session, okay? So with that, I'm going to do a presentation of our presenters here in order. We have joining us from the City of Ottawa, we have Inga Rosendahl. Inga is a senior planner for the Ottawa Public Health and is currently co-located with the City of Ottawa's Planning, Infrastructure, Economic Department, and Economic Development Department to work on the new official plan. Inga is experienced in the development of healthy public policy and advancing strategic partnerships on innovative intersectoral projects. So Inga will start off the presentations to provide some insights on how transportation equity is important for public health and helps make communities better for everybody. Then we have speakers joining us from the City of Edmonton here. We have Jessica Lamar. Jessica is the Director of State Mobility for the City of Edmonton. She and her 14,000 colleagues are dedicated to achieving Vision Zero, zero traffic-related fatalities and serious injuries through safe and livable streets in Edmonton, a goal that they are well on their way to achieving. Jessica leads a diverse team of rock stars, that's specifically highlighted here, rock stars, who champion a holistic portfolio of work in support of the city's safe mobility strategy, including road safety engineering, automated enforcement, planning and evaluation, and community activation. At the heart of this work is a commitment to equitable safety and pushing beyond the traditional pillars of safety to facilitate the decisions necessary to achieve a more livable and equitable Edmonton. Jessica holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Alberta, has worked in both municipal government and post-secondary, and is currently delighted by replacing vehicle trips with her new e-bike. And as a side note, I also tried out an e-bike for the first time just a couple of weekends ago, and I'm very jealous of you because I really want one too. Joining Jessica is Shrikar Ibrahim. Shrikar is the manager of Safe Mobility Engineering with the City of Edmonton's Safe Mobility section. She has just completed her PhD from the University of British Columbia in the area of transportation engineering with a focus on traffic safety. Congratulations on that. An engineer by day and a researcher by night, Shrikar is passionate about finding ways to improve safety and mobility for all road users. Her work and research are focused in Vision Zero and moving towards adopting a proactive approach to improve safety in the areas of traffic safety, planning, geometric design, and speed management. So Jessica and Shrikar will talk about how projects like the Edmonton Safe Mobility Strategy can help improve transportation equity. You may have seen that earlier on in our advertisement, we've also said that Matt Davis was going to be joining us from the City of Toronto. I believe that there may have been a conflict with that, so I don't think Matt will be joining us today, but I think we have a great panel here, and so we'll be able to field some questions with the team that we have here. So both Jessica and Shrikar will be talking about the Edmonton Safe Mobility Strategy. And of course, if you have any additional questions on transportation equity, please feel free to ask them through our Q&A. I do want to note that in specifically, as we started this off, and we'll go to you, Inga, right after this, I think this event particularly is in a response that to some of the calls that we've sent out to our membership earlier last year as well as this year, and we specifically had encouraged our members to really look at inequities in our communities and to learn about them and to understand them and to fight racism as well as other types of discrimination in our workplaces, but also through our work. And so this panel is really meant to speak to that and us, putting our foot where our mouth is and making sure that we're actually speaking to these topics. It's something that I've been personally very excited to talk about and an event that I've been really excited to organize for a while through this section. I think transportation equity is a very topical thing. It's a very complex issue. It's not something that's going to be solved or answered through these presentations. I shouldn't speak for our presenters, but I don't think we're going to walk away with answers for how to do everything perfectly and better. And I really think that transportation equity is a journey. It's not a destination. It's something that needs to consistently be considered through the work that we're doing. And there are many different aspects of it. So I do think that we're really just going to be scratching the surface here, but it's going to be a really exciting conversation. And I'm really interested to see where we go when we start taking questions and when we're seeing the presentations. So with that, Inga, I'm going to switch my slides here and it's going to go over to you.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Yes, yeah, scratching the surface. Thanks for that. That's exactly how I was feeling when I was preparing this. I had so much I wanted to say, and I'm like, it's not going to happen. So I'm going to try to scratch the surface on kind of, hitting the high notes today. But it's just such a pleasure to be here with you today. Firstly, I'd like to start by honoring the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people on whose unceded traditional territory the City of Ottawa is located. And I'd like to extend this respect to all First Nations, Inuit, Métis people, their ancestors, and their elders. Next slide, please. All right. So I'm an urban planner, but I've spent my career in a somewhat unusual wedge. I've always worked in public health, and these days, as mentioned, I'm co-located with our planning department. These days, it's fair to say public health has been in the forefront of people's awareness in a very different way from the past. But beyond the pandemic, public health broadly has always had a goal to improve the health of the population. We're different from the healthcare system. Often our work is invisible, it's in the background as we work towards influencing systems and society so that people can stay healthy. And the pandemic, wow, has it ever amplified in a big way those things that we have been saying for years? Inequities exist. They make us more vulnerable to illnesses and they impede people's ability to thrive. And all parts of society have a role to play in making sure that in a post-pandemic world, we really start to deal with those root causes and we work within each of our sectors to make health and well-being a level playing field for everyone. So for my work, that has meant thinking about the built environment and how we need to reshape it to make the healthy choice the easy choice. And it's essentially to figure out how we can engineer health and well-being back into our neighborhoods in a way that's equitable and that serves those that are the most vulnerable. Because really, I mean, if we build our communities for those that are the most vulnerable, we end up building these great communities for everyone. And a really big piece of that puzzle is transportation and how it relates to the surrounding built form and what it means for the people who navigate it. Transportation systems can nudge people to make decisions that are healthy or unhealthy. They can include and they can exclude people depending on their design. Next slide, please. So we know that some people experience more barriers from the built environment than others, leading to challenges in making healthy decisions or unfair exposures to environments that could harm them. Where you live and your life circumstance influences health. In Ottawa, we know the data is reflecting this. People with a low income or in disadvantaged neighborhoods are more likely to experience poor health on a range of issues. And never has this been more clear than during the pandemic. So I'm going to just share a little anecdote. When I was a lot younger, you may guess by my name that I'm Dutch. For any, Ing is not an uncommon Dutch name. When I was much younger, I would visit my 85-year-old grandmother in the Netherlands back in the, I'm going to date myself, but in the 90s, in the good old 90s. And she'd have me join her on family visits and errands. And this was all carried out using a bike. This woman was 85 years old. But because she'd never had a license, she spent her life biking. So she was in pretty good shape for biking and she wasn't afraid to cycle. But there were no speed bikes involved, no sporty clothes. I don't think my gran ever owned any spandex in her life. Just her in her little dress with her saddlebags and her old school upright bikes. You see, her bike was her ticket to freedom. It was her connection to her community, and it was a passport to health. She didn't bike to get exercise. She just wanted to get around. And that was the advantage of living in a very walkable and bikeable environment. You can drive when you need to drive, but biking is often the easier, the cheaper, and the more direct option for local travel. So when I think about transportation equity, and when I was reflecting on this presentation, I was thinking about my Oma and the freedom it gave her to age in place and stay connected to her community. And she was fortunate to be able to take advantage of that freedom until the very end of her life. We often talk about aging in place today and how we can build communities for everyone. Imagine if you're an older adult and you don't have a license anymore or access to a car. What would that mean for you in your community and where you live? Imagine how wonderful it would be to have great, safe cycling and walking networks so that you have the freedom of movement and access to your community and your activities. Imagine on a hot summer day, not unlike today, being older and living in a neighborhood where you can walk along a sidewalk with big canopy trees to the local commercial street for your errands. These features can make or break our ability to thrive in our communities. So although I don't have a picture of my Oma on a bike, unfortunately, I do have one of me and my mom before we immigrated. So that's a little picture of us on the screen. Clearly that bike seat is not up to code. So as a good public health person, I have to flag that, but you get the gist. My mom's in her snazzy tweed with a little mini skirt and it looks like she has me hoisted on her bike, not for a workout, but probably heading out to go socializing or to go run errands. Again, for her, the bike was also a means to an end and not the end itself. She didn't have a car, so the bike was freedom for her too. And that brings me to gender and equity in transportation systems. We know that women travel more on foot or using public transport than men, but fewer women bike to work than men. We also know that women trip chain much more than men. So basically, they're more often combining multiple purposes per trip. So what this tells us is that to achieve gender equity in transportation, we need to make sure our communities are more walkable and transit supportive. And it tells us that to increase the mode share of women cycling, we need those protected cycling facilities. When we don't provide those things, or when we prioritize vehicular modes, we're inherently building gender biases into our transportation system. And then you layer on top of that, that concept of intersectionality that we've been hearing a lot more about of late, and which is, you know, the multiple overlapping identities that people have. Those barriers within our transportation system become even more pronounced. So for instance, if you're a woman who's a recent immigrant and may have fewer resources, you may be even more limited in your transportation options. And then, like, let's not forget, driving is expensive. So combining housing and transportation costs can really make or break housing affordability too. So making sure our transportation systems and their surrounding land uses reduce dependency on cars is a really important piece of the puzzle for improving housing affordability too. Next slide, please. Then, of course, when we think of our transportation system from the point of view of children, that opens up a whole new set of imperatives. In Ottawa, only 18% of kids walk or bike to school, quite a drop from a generation or two ago. And only a quarter of kids in Ottawa meet physical activity requirements every day. And it's probably, frankly, a lot worse now. But is this surprising? If we build communities without sidewalks and without direct connections to destinations, with insufficient tree canopies and streets that are difficult for children to cross, then we can see this drop in children's active transportation as a very logical response to our environments. So we need to design our way out of this too. We need to prioritize the design of transportation networks that make school active transportation the logical and the healthy choice. And you know, the research is really clear. It's incredibly protective, not just for physical health, but for mental health. Kids who walk to school, they're better prepared to learn. And important life lessons can happen on the walk to school. For any of you who have children that have walked to school, I know, you know, my kids, shenanigans with friends can be solved. Neighborhoods can be explored. There's a lot of action on that walk between home and school. Next slide, please. Okay, so we know we need big shifts to build more equitable communities and transportation systems, all part and parcel of building a healthier and more climate resilient communities. But how do we get there? The pandemic has really highlighted what we've always said we need for equitable land use and transportation environments. And we need to leverage our new learnings for building back better in our post-pandemic world, so that we're resilient to those major disruptors in a way that doesn't put some groups at significant disadvantage into the future. Here at the City of Ottawa, one of the key paradigm shifts that has enormous transportation equity components is the 15-minute neighborhood. This concept frames our new draft official plan and is a cornerstone for how we're advancing healthy communities through our OP. 15-minute neighborhoods, they're places with a clustering of land uses and very supportive walking and cycling environments. They're places where that healthy choice does become the easy choice. People can access their daily needs on foot within 15 minutes from home. They foster social connections and well-being. They have those nice big tree canopies, places to sit and linger. These are communities with streets that are places to be rather than just travel through. They are places that are inclusive with a people-centric design. And transportation equity is such an important piece of this puzzle. The city's official plan will set the macro policy to recognize the interconnection between that land use and transportation systems and the goals for walkability that in turn then need to ripple throughout our policy as well as our decision-making systems. Next slide, please. So to conclude, As we venture forward together to solve these intractable problems of inequities in a post-pandemic world, I'm really excited to see the important role that transportation engineering has to play in building back better for everyone. And I'm so thrilled that you guys are launching conversations amongst your profession to see how this can be achieved. Thanks.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Inga. And I love the little photo. It's a very, very personal and nice example for that. So it's really exciting to see what's coming out of as somebody who lives in Ottawa. It's really exciting to see what's coming out through the official plan work and what that means for the city going forward. So I think that's going to be great. Look forward to that. All right. I just want to give a reminder that if anybody has any questions that come up or any questions specifically for any particular, it would be very helpful if you have questions for a particular speaker, please put into your question who it's for, or it could be for everybody. That's okay too. But feel free to use the chat function and send those over. So I'm going to pass it on to Shrikar and Jessica to talk about a really exciting new project that I know CITE has profiled quite a bit. And how that's improving equitable road safety in the city of Edmonton. I'm just going to switch slides right now, and it's over to you.
Thanks, Miriam, and thanks, Inga, for that presentation. It was interesting and struck me, and when we're all sharing stories from across the country, how many places of commonality we have in terms of city building and transportation work. I think we're even more common now because I think that the NCC recently stole Kaylin Anderson from us here in Edmonton as the chief planner. So it'll be interesting to see more connections over time as that happens. So it's still morning here in Edmonton. Those of you eating lunch, it's a little early for us, but lovely to be spending some time with you. As Miriam introduced me, I'm Jessica Lamar. I'm the Director of Safe Mobility here at the City of Edmonton, and I'm here with Shrikar Ibrahim, who is the Manager of Safe Mobility Engineering in my team. And we're honored to be joining you from Treaty 6 territory. And I think just want to take a moment as we're talking about the spaces in which we live to acknowledge that there's a lot of pain and tragedy right now in the truth that's being realized around unmarked graves in particular in residential schools. And I know we're feeling that here in Edmonton. I'm sure you're feeling it where you are. We are so privileged to be able to think about how we animate the space that has been gifted to us that many have cared for before us. So just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that. I imagine that we're all quite familiar with Vision Zero, which is the goal of zero traffic-related fatalities and serious injuries. And for the most part, typical Vision Zero plans come with a fairly familiar structure that looks at focusing on anywhere from 3 to 5 of the E's. In Edmonton, the focus has been on 5 E's: engineering, enforcement, education, engagement, and evaluation. And as I'll show you in a moment, some of those E's were yielding pretty exceptional results in reducing fatalities and serious injuries on our roads. But when it came time to build the next 5-year strategy, which is what the Safe Mobility Strategy is for 2021 to 2025, it was time for us to really start thinking about what was missing beyond that typical. Now, as Miriam mentioned earlier, this is not really an uncommon question to be posed these days, as we start to challenge ourselves to think about our own privilege, perspective, and biases. So as a result, the Safe Mobility Strategy became a GBA Plus pilot project for the City of Edmonton. Now, if you're not familiar with GBA Plus, it's a tool or a lens that's applied to everyday thinking, work, and relationships, and it prioritizes diversity and inclusion in the work. GBA Plus is a great way to start to examine the work of a municipality, a group, or an organization, especially those that are focusing on making streets safer and more livable. Because really, at the end of the day, that definition can't be the same for every person. We really need to start looking at what does it mean to be safe? What does it mean to be livable? And how might that change based on your life circumstance, how you see the world, who you are, where you were born? There's so many factors that play into it. Ultimately, Edmonton is one of those cities that was designed and built for cars, but has a real goal and vision around continuing to evolve into a city that is built for people. And so this is where we're really called to action when we start to think about planning and acting more equitably as we're building for people. And Miriam, we're just going to stay on this slide that you've got up now. So just a tiny bit of background. The Safe Mobility Strategy replaces our current, or well, now just past road safety strategy, which was written for 2016 to 2020. And City Council here in Edmonton was the first to adopt Vision Zero in our country. It was adopted in 2015. And Vision Zero really did shape that road safety strategy. It delivered incredibly strong results, but it was predominantly using a location-based hotspot approach. Through this work, most of Edmonton's most dangerous intersections and streets have been identified and treated with the proper countermeasures. And we've been working to eliminate and reduce the contributing causes of crashes. This work has resulted in a 63% reduction in fatalities and a 40% reduction in serious injuries since 2015. So, I mean, that's amazing work by the team. That's amazing work across the city of Edmonton and then, of course, within our community. So really, it sounds like we were totally set up to just continue on and be successful, right? We didn't really have to do a whole lot of reworking or thinking because we're doing so well with the current approach, except not so much. Despite pretty sweeping support for safety, which I think we're all pretty familiar with in our area. Safety is one of those hard things to say no to. But once again, the definition of safety becomes the question and what it means to feel safe, what people think the priority of safety should look like on our streets. It was becoming pretty clear we weren't all on the same page about that. And so while so important, Vision Zero's mandate around focusing on fatalities and serious injuries can be quite narrow, and sometimes it limits the variety of priorities that we can select to match. In Edmonton, that was translating into some incredibly tough discussions. Locations without a tragic crash history, mainly neighborhood roads, weren't receiving attention, despite pretty much constant concerns being raised about near crashes, poor driver behavior, impacts on livability. Much of the pieces that Miriam was talking about around trying to create those livable spaces and the places that we want people to spend most of their time. You know, Edmonton also has visions of the 15-minute districts in our city plan, but in order to actually prioritize that work, we were totally out of scope with where the efforts were being placed based on that, you know, prioritization of hotspots with the reactive work of where crashes were happening. Public discussions about road safety were becoming increasingly oppositional. People didn't feel heard. Safety improvements weren't geographically or situationally equitable. We were missing some pretty important tools in the toolbox to keep moving forward on the path to zero. And it was clear that the work was going to become much more complex from here. That first 5 years, you know, we were really able to focus on some areas that ultimately gave us great return on investment when you want to look at the quantitative results of working towards Vision Zero. But we really needed to shift into leveraging both location-based and systemic approaches in this new strategy. We know that we cannot solve this problem by fixing intersections alone. We have to start working on culture. We have to start working on some of those systemic impacts that come along with road safety, especially things like street equity. And that was something that really hit on the equity piece. So it was time to really look up and out in order to ground ourselves in creating a plan that Edmontonians felt represented in, felt a part of, and that they felt would make a difference in their lives. Next slide, please, Miriam. So I'm lucky to have entered the picture just on the heels of the city having recently completed its strategic plan, Connect Edmonton. And that featured some absolutely brilliant and extensive public engagement. It really does not take long to recognize that safety and livability of our streets is totally interconnected with the 4 strategic goals in Connect Edmonton. And a lot of this resonates with what Miriam was just talking to us about: healthy city, urban places, regional prosperity, and climate resilience, which are those 4 pillars in our strategic plan. I bet they're probably pillars in yours as well. When we make it safer for people of all ages and abilities to move around our city by any mode in any season, we generate broad societal benefits. We improve physical health and wellness, we connect neighbors, we reduce tragic impacts to lives and livelihoods, we reduce the economic impact of crashes, we boost our local economy, we contribute to our climate resilience goals. Like, we could talk for hours about all the good stuff here. By drawing on this work, though, our definition of safe was expanded to include the always enigmatic concept of livability. And the Safe Mobility Strategy was enabled to keep top of mind actions large and small that help support the vision of Edmonton as we grow into a city of 2 million people. So as I've mentioned, safety at its core is differently defined by each person. To feel safe versus unsafe varies by an endless number of factors, including age, experience, gender, mode, language, housing status, and more. And these are some of the pieces that we'll start to get into a little more with some examples. We really needed to start challenging ourselves about what we knew, but more importantly, about what we didn't know. This is not something any of us feel comfortable in admitting. And I'm not an engineer. I work with many brilliant engineers, and this is sometimes one of the hardest things for us to say, what we don't know. And how do we make decisions based off of what we don't know? This work is full of assumptions, lived experience gaps, misalignment of beliefs, ideals, and vision, data challenges, time and resource constraints. All of these pieces are roadblocks that make prioritizing equity difficult. And just like Mary mentioned earlier, let me be clear, Shrikar and I are not here to tell you how we've totally fixed this issue. We live in this utopia of perfect equity over here. I think we have barely scratched the surface through applying an equitable approach, first to building this strategy, but then second into the work that we've included in it over the next 5 years. My team is charged with working towards transportation equity and city building equity every single day. And I can tell you, I think this might be one of the hardest parts of our jobs, because we are constantly challenged with being pulled out of that into other kinds of priorities. And it takes courage to keep working towards that every day, which is why I'm totally pleased to now pass you over to Shrikar. And she's going to tell you a little bit about how we continue to try to do that.
Perfect. Thank you, Jessica. So an important and far-reaching topic of equity can seem very daunting to deal with in the beginning. While the definition is somewhat clear, there's usually very little information available, especially right now, regarding how we can best prioritize equity when it comes to making decisions, particularly from an operational perspective. So for this reason, we broke down our process into 5 different steps to see how we can incorporate equity into each one. And for each of these steps, we questioned and challenged ourselves to look deeper. So for instance, we have quantitative data. So there's often a belief that strictly relying on numbers is one of the best ways where we can remain objective about the results of our analysis. But is that always the case? Are there other data sets that we could be using, or that we might not even have, but we need in order to help give us more context or insight? For qualitative analysis, we have to look at and question, who aren't we hearing from? What are some of the obstacles that are preventing these groups from participating? Because we need to hear from everyone if we are designing roads for everyone. The next one is particularly interesting because as an engineer, we all know that our standards and guidelines and processes are sometimes a little bit behind in catching up to current knowledge and research. And almost certainly there are inherent assumptions that we are making that need to be addressed. An important part of the process, of course, is technology and how that has now become an integral part of any project, evaluation, or assessment. So what are some of the ways that we can use it to address the gaps that we are seeing? And finally, transparency. How is information regarding a project or strategy being shared or made publicly available? So to put these steps into perspective, we will go through them with the lens of the work that we have done leading up to the development of our safe mobility strategy. Sorry, I'm lagging on my end. So any strong safe mobility strategy will definitely be evidence-based. And it was really critical for us to look more closely at the City of Edmonton's road network and to better understand where we should focus our efforts. So we considered which modes are most affected in fatal and serious injuries, the underlying causes for why they are occurring, and where. The high injury network, which is shown, a part of it is shown on this slide, is the intersections and stretches of roads that have the highest concentration of serious injury and fatal crashes for each mode of travel. We're showing a zoomed in perspective to have a closer look at the detail, but we did create the high injury network and we developed that for the city citywide, which shows us the Vision Zero crash-prone corridors for each mode of transportation that needs our attention. Knowing which modes are most effective in specific areas really helps us consider where we need to place our efforts to best address the needs of vulnerable road users, but also helps to plan which types of countermeasures or changes might be applied to achieve the kind of safety impacts that we need. When we look at specifically at our high crash neighborhoods in Edmonton, we found that 20% of low-income households live in high crash neighborhoods. In contrast, only 7% of high-income households do. Other equity-seeking communities that are overrepresented in high crash neighborhoods also include visible minorities and linguistic minorities. So taking these high injury neighborhoods, crashes, road intersections, and corridors is going to be integral to integrating this information in transportation and city building projects across the corporation. Many of the jurisdictions in Canada have neighborhood renewal, arterial renewal programs. Yeah, many of us have bike plan strategies that we're trying to identify where to best create that continuity across the network. And so taking this information and applying it within other projects, not necessarily owned just by our section, but by the corporation, is one of the key action items that we have in our strategy. Another piece that's also interesting is the qualitative data. So when we did our equity analysis, it really inspired us to think about the neighborhoods and people that these crash-prone spaces laid out on the high injury network impact. Most of the systems we have in place to access traffic safety concerns and prioritize projects really relies on being alerted to programs or to problems by the public through what we have a system called 311. Now, focus on complaints or requests. Improvements are often driven by complaints. That is not necessarily a very equitable approach to demonstrate that using the 311 info that we have used or have applied in the city of Edmonton over the past 5 years, we overlaid that with the high crash injury neighborhoods and found very little correlation between the two different data sets. So by using a GBA perspective and asking ourselves, who are we not hearing from? In this case, the high crash neighborhood residents, they definitely don't have the time, energy, or resources to contact us. And those are really important learnings and feedback that we need to incorporate into our processes moving forward to make sure that we are not inadvertently ignoring contributions to inequity that we have in our process. So one of our key pieces for our projects is not to have the program be complaint-based or driven, and to add in more proactive ways to add locations to our list for prioritization.
Sorry, Shvikar, I'm going to give you a 60-second mark here because we have a guest speaker surprise in this event. So
Okay.
Maybe wrap things up, please. Thank you.
Sure. The next two pieces are, the first one is the standards and guidelines, and us being aware of what are some of the inherent assumptions that we need to make. So when we are reviewing some of these guidelines and standards that are taking usually a very long time to catch up to current practice and research, we have to take a look at what are some of the inherent assumptions. So as an example, when we're looking at pedestrian crossings, some of the inherent assumptions don't necessarily explicitly take into consideration factors such as land use, surrounding connections, bus stops, senior centers, and all that. So we are addressing this by taking a proactive approach, as well as expanding our toolkit to include measures other than just signalization for crosswalks. Another part for technology is trying to find different ways for us to incorporate new measures or new indicators in order to collect some of the information and data sets that we need to inform our decisions. So an example of something that we're doing in the city of Edmonton is using video-based analysis to categorize the number of people that we have crossing, but also to look at the length of time that people are needing to use a crosswalk. This replaces having to count and categorize pedestrians as seniors or children, and rather looking at the most important part here, which is giving them more time to cross if we are seeing that that is the need at this particular intersection. And finally, the last step of any project is, of course, communication and transparency. So one key action item for us is to create public access to assessment criteria, prioritization decisions, implementation status, and post-implementation evaluations for all safe mobility projects. And finally, and ultimately, an equity lens helps planners and designers see the needs of every person potentially served or impacted by our transportation decision. Many of today's transportation systems were built with an emphasis on a single purpose and a limited range of users. The equity lens recognizes the full array of people presented in different places, for example, not just individuals who own or operate a motorized vehicle. And sometimes, while yes, you need a major overhaul of all your processes, it can also always start with one step. Thank you very much. And if you'll be happy to receive any questions, of course, at the end of the webinar, but also we have our emails listed here if there's anything that comes up afterwards. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Jessica and Shrikar. That was excellent. That's a really exciting and cool project that I've been seeing floating around, and it's so great to hear about it and all of the steps and the layering of those lenses to see how equity can be embedded into the things that we do. For example, road safety traditionally, right? Like just adding that additional lens and that extra approach and just thinking about it a little bit differently, because I totally agree, like what you're saying, it begins with one step. It just is a matter of thinking about it differently and starting on that journey towards improving it. So thank you so much for that. With the National Capital section, because the fun never ends, we do have a surprise entry for our last and third speaker. Matt, are you here with us? Can you test out your microphone and video?
I am here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. That's fantastic. Okay.
All right,
So
can you see me?
I can see you. Yes, I can see you.
Okay.
I'm going to introduce you before I let you do your thing. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay, and if you want to, in the meantime, you can share your screen if you have any slides to share with us. So thank you for joining us, Matthew Davis. Matthew has 20 years of experience in transit and transportation planning and engineering. Currently the manager of the Capital Project and Programs Unit, the City of Toronto's Transportation Services Division, where he leads a team of motivated professionals currently overseeing capital, operating budgets, and developing plans, programs, and policies to prioritize the city's transportation capital program and projects over the short and long term. By incorporating equity, geographic, socioeconomic, and more into primary decision frameworks, the team aspires to help provide access to transportation and mobility options to help all Torontonians keep Toronto moving safely, efficiently, and equitably. So Matthew will speak on how diversity and inclusion at the project team level contributes to transportation equity in what we do and what we see on the ground. So over to you, Matt.
All right, thanks. I think you may need to make me presenter so I can
let's do that.
Share the screen.
That's a great, here we go. So I'm gonna stop. Did I stop? Now presenter.
Okay, let's see. Just 1 second. Let's see if this works. Pull this up. All right, I'm going to share. See if you can see. Can you see my screen?
We can. It's not full screen, but right now we can see it. Yep. Yep.
Okay. All right. All right. So I want to. So first of all, thank you for the introduction. I've been listening to all these presentations, first of all, and I just want to say thank you to all of you out there who are doing such, honestly, it's very difficult work. We all are trained engineers, planners, and what have you. And I think the discussion around equity challenges many of us, excuse me, in ways that we haven't been challenged in our careers. I think that it hasn't been taught to us in school. I think that a lot of the things that we're doing these days are responsive. In some cases, I've heard some proactivity. So all of it is really good. And I just wanted to just give many thanks to all the professionals who I've been hearing. I actually also, while I've been listening, I had a few slides together, but then I don't want to just keep adding on, to everything. So I just wanted to present, I think, a couple of different parts of the conversation, so that the people that are listening to the presentation leave with more of a full picture, as opposed to hearing the city of Toronto is doing very similar to what Edmonton is doing, what Ottawa is doing. So if you can excuse me, I'm going to jump around a little bit in the graphics, and I can get this to you later on. But I feel like we should have a conversation, and then we can, if you have any questions, we can talk about it. So As Miriam said, thank you, Miriam, again for the intro. As Miriam said, I want to talk about diversity and equity as it pertains to the project level sort of impacts. But the way to get there, I'm just going to slide through this a bit. I do want to present that we do have an equity working group in the city of Toronto. It's very hard for us to establish equity as a quote unquote program, but it doesn't stop people that are passionate about it from coming together in transportation. And so if you don't have an equity working group, perhaps you could consider one. But the reason why I'm bringing up this in terms of the projects is because transportation, at least in the city of Toronto, encompasses so many things. Excuse me. There's the planning and programming, all the things that Miriam says that I do for the city of Toronto. But there's also the pieces, the road ops, the vision serials someone brought up. There's there's just general maintenance. There's so many things that go into transportation that we want equity not just to be on the minds of planners and people behind the desk, but also out there on the streets, striping the roads, creating the bike lanes, and everything that way. So that's one of the reasons why I showed the equity working group slide. The previous presenters were talking about 311, in which we have a very similar approach. So this is, again, we've gotten a very similar response in 311 in the city of Toronto, where what you see on the right-hand side is a map. The light green areas are the maps of what we call neighborhood improvement areas, which are identified through our strong neighborhood strategy. These are areas that are identified as either being low income, or perhaps they have other characteristics which make these the more marginalized communities in the city. So what you can see just off a basic map is that the top 10 areas that we have from 311 calls don't even line up at all with the neighborhood improvement areas. And there's many reasons behind this. Excuse me. We found that some of the reasons are perhaps apprehension to report and bring government into people's neighborhoods, as particular immigration statuses are a bit, they're all around. It could be anything. There's also the discomfort with English as a language here, just in general, even if people are legally here in the country. There's even, we've even found that in some cases you may have someone that is legal here in the country, but perhaps they have a family member that is not. So they don't want to call 311 because they don't want to bring attention to it. There are so many reasons why this is happening, right? But one of the number one reasons that we're seeing is just apathy, to be honest. A lot of people don't feel that given a particular status in the city of Toronto or in Canada, that if they call about a pothole, that someone's actually going to do something about it. So that is a piece that there's not much that engineers and planners can do about political apathy, except to continue to try and improve our processes to deliver. But similar to the previous presenters, we have this issue as well. Does not provide for an equitable production or promotion of any sort of delivery of projects or improvements. I'm showing this slide again because I want to get to a point in a couple minutes, so you just bear with me. So I heard the other presenters just now talking about disparities in collisions based on particular neighborhoods and communities. I don't know. I'm from the U.S. originally, so I don't know. I've been in Canada for about 10 years. It's the first place I ever lived where the driver's license doesn't indicate the race of the driver. I don't know if that's Canada-wide, but it is, at least in Ontario. And so I'm presenting this is US stats from the Smart Growth America report. If you're interested, I would highly recommend you take a look at it, because the graphics and the stats are relatively clear that as you go from Asian Pacific Islander to Black or African American and American Indian, or what we call Indigenous here, the relative pedestrian danger by race and ethnicity increases. Now, this is very difficult, and I will just share with you, because this is at the project level, very difficult, at least for me and for what we're doing in the city of Toronto, to collect this type of data, right? Like individual collision statistics by race. That has to change, because we can't improve the things we need to improve by race if we can't identify the problem by race. So one of the things that we're doing, and I'll get to the project level things through this conversation, we created an equity initiative. I don't even like to call it that. And the one thing I will say is to all the presenters that talked today, again, it was great work. But the thing that I think our industry has gotten us to sort of believe is that there's an equity lens or an equity piece. It's like equity should be treated just like Vision Zero, like it cross cuts everything. And so what our I named it an initiative just to get it approved by my senior management. But for the most part, we're trying to do a 360-degree view of how we're looking at equity. So one, for example, is this equity-based capital assessment framework. I'll discuss briefly about that in a minute. But that goes along with prioritizing our entire capital program with equity in the forefront. And so I'll show you an example about that in a bit. The other part is equity baselining, which I'll also show you a quick example of. So the question being, when City of Toronto's been, a city for over 100 years, right? So how have we been delivering services in a way that is equitable? And how do we measure that? Especially since race-based data is so hard to come by, at least in Ontario and Toronto. How do we measure that? I'm going to show you an example of that. There's a community reconciliation project. So don't ignore the actively seeking partners. That was internal for us. But the community reconciliation project sort of speaks to this. We, in our grand wisdom and all of our training, we do have a good idea of what some communities might need to bring about transformative change through the transportation lens, right? I think we all do. But we also need to pay attention to what has been done in these communities in the past, especially when it comes to, racialized communities, Indigenous. When we present and we say you need a bike lane, for example, if these folks have been displaced from some other major infrastructure decision that happened 50 years ago, do they really want a bike lane? If we have capital money to throw at a particular community, or invest, I guess is a better way to put it, why would we invest it and throw good money after bad? We need to be able to speak to these communities in a way, and not just speak to them, but more importantly, hear back from them and let that conversation sort of guide the type of investment decisions we're making, especially in some of the more sensitive areas of our and marginalized areas of our city. So I won't talk too much about that, but that again, relates to how you get from this equity and diversity sort of cloud discussion down to an actual project. The other thing, number 4, race-based data collection. I've mentioned it before. I'm sure some of the folks around the country have household travel surveys. In the Toronto area, we call it the Transportation Tomorrow Survey. We collectively, City of Toronto and other municipalities, have sort of band together with MTO to really try to get a race-based question in the Transportation Tomorrow Survey. I think the survey is going on for 20 years or more, and it hasn't been asked once. But then our official plan says, hey, we're out here trying to create infrastructure that is equitable and accessible for all. So how do we do that if we don't have the race-based data? I will tell you that it is a struggle, but we are working on it. And then number 5, it says diverse suppliers, but I will also tell you it's more like it's diverse suppliers, and it's establishing the pipeline for representation, right? Like I can't see everyone's face on the screen here, but I would imagine there's probably a lack of racialized or people of color on the cameras, and that's fine, right? But if we want transformative change, we have to also begin to look at the pipeline towards bringing more people with more diverse experiences through the ranks so they can be on this call, hopefully next year, but 5, 10, 15 years from now. The diverse suppliers piece is a big part of that. If you're a city that says, I'm all about equity, right? You also need to be about equity in the way you're fostering relationships with diverse suppliers. We all know of the major companies. I used to be a consultant, so we all know of the major companies that are out there that are doing this work. And for all of you that are maybe on the call, if you can offer this type of service, fantastic. If you can diversify your own teams, that's even better. But then there's these smaller firms that may offer these type of services that cities want, and they're not getting the attention. They may not even be getting the opportunity. And so we're looking in the city to figure out, we're turning the lens back to us saying, how do we speak better to that sort of problem and be able to address it? So this is our sort of broad program. As you can see, we try not to keep it to just the planning and programming side, but we also try to bring it to the diverse supplier side. So I know I'm running out of time, but I will say,
I'm going to give you 30 to 45 seconds.
Okay. So I'm going to give you, because I know we're all planners and engineers, and so this is a version of our transportation equity lens tool. And this is a thing that we use when we look at particular projects where we try to identify the equity seeking groups or categories that folks that may be impacted versus the needs and barriers that the project tries to alleviate, the positive impacts of the project, the negative impacts of the project, and what happens. Many people don't ask this. What happens if the project doesn't happen? And so we bring all of this into a much broader tool, which is the capital program prioritization tool. I won't read you all of this, but for the most part, we basically try to take what you just saw, bring it into a much larger framework, because we didn't have an established process to evaluate capital programs, only services. So we brought this into a bigger picture framework, and equity, that equity lens tool that you just saw in the previous slide comes in, and it brings a equity component to it. What we're studying is how to actually score equity, which is almost impossible. And I personally don't want to, but at the same time, if I want some numbers like this, last slide, then we have to start doing it. So this is what I was talking about for baselining. Without reading anything on here, what I'm going to tell you is we baselined our neighborhood improvement area work when it comes to road maintenance and pavement quality. And what we saw, the two plots are you can see them on the left-hand side. What they basically say is, the top plot says, look, between NIAs and non-NIAs, the effort was proportional, right? There's like 80% of places that are not NIAs in the city. We spent about 80% of our of our maintenance budget on those places. Pretty good story. Bottom categories, or the bottom plot, shows that the actual pavement quality index in the areas was all over the place. It's not consistent, and it's not proportional, which basically says that excuse me, about 6 or 7, maybe 8% difference in pavement quality, where the NIAs have worse pavement quality than the non-NIAs. Now, where does this bring to you, and where does this bring the discussion in from a project-related basis? Very simple. All of us know it is easier to put a bike lane on a road that's been paved than a road that's not been paved. We can do so many things when the road is in a good condition versus when it's not. And so this lends to a biased, and probably not biased in a racially or some type of way like that, but it's a biased approach where some of these areas that may need some of these improvements that come along with a good quality road are not getting them. So this is the baselining exercise that I was telling you about, and we're taking this on. This is our major local roads. We're doing this for sidewalks. We're doing it for everything we deliver. So I just wanted to give you that. I know I'm out of time, but I just wanted to give you the more broad picture of how all of these discussions actually materialize into the way we deliver projects, and the way projects are actually how people are actually benefiting or not from the work that we're doing in the areas that we feel like we need the most impact. So I'll close it off then if anyone has any questions. I know I'm over time, but I tried my best, Miriam, to fit in 10 minutes.
No, this is great. Thank you so much, Matt. And thank you to everybody, because I think I know I was like, I'm going to be really strict and I'm going to cut them off, but I am so interested. I think these are super important and interesting things to consider and to learn about what is happening in all the different municipalities. And I don't want to cut any of it off, because I think it's very impactful and something that really needs to be considered by all of the professionals who are on this call, and non-professionals, aspiring professionals. I'm not sure exactly who is here. I know Jessica and Shrikar, thank you so much for answering some questions I think that were going on in the chat. Maybe just and being mindful of the time and of all the presenters' time, maybe I'll close it off. It doesn't seem like there's any other questions that came up as we were talking about this. Maybe I'll pose a question, very quick, 30-second answers to all of the presenters of what is your one main takeaway for all of the people on this call who are looking to contribute to improving transportation equity? Maybe we'll go in the order. So Inga, do you have a quick takeaway? What is one goal or thing that you want people to walk away with after this?
I think break new ground. We have to be comfortable to break new ground and try new things, and out with the old, in with the new. So think creatively, think outside the box, and be a trailblazer.
Perfect, great, thank you. Jessica?
I think right now, and this I'm telling myself this every day right now, but don't be discouraged by the setbacks. There will still be political files. There will still be pieces that we can't action the way that we want to. There will still be dollar problems and prioritization issues. That will still happen. We're not going to be able to solve that all with one plan. And Shrikar and I just talked about this morning. Hold true to what we can do and keep moving that forward and keep having those conversations to inspire the bigger picture.
Shrikar?
I think for me, there's a couple. So first, as an engineer, it's really challenging for us to admit that, some of the decisions and inherent assumptions that we're making can lead to inequities. So I think really sitting with that and giving ourselves the space to set that aside and actually look into what we can do, and like, who aren't we hearing from? What are some of the obstacles that are barriers that are preventing us from taking this a little bit more to the next level? And the second piece is really leverage your networks. Like, this is a great opportunity. We've already seen so many different speakers here. So there are other people across the globe that are trying to figure this out, and they have the willingness, and creating the conversations with them will definitely help. So reach out to your network for sure.
Thanks for that. And Matt, if you want to close us off, any key takeaways from messages?
Sure. I think that, so again, great presentations, everyone. I think the key thing to remember, in addition to everything everyone has said, is that we are in a people-centered profession. We're here to serve people. And I think that for far too long, a lot of segments of the communities have not been served. So I feel like as long as we're all public servants, or at least the folks on the call and the panel, if we're public servants, or even if you're working as a private consultant on a public contract, keep that in mind when you think about how far you want to go into looking at the way your project has been planned, prioritized, and ultimately paid for and delivered. Because if you keep that in your mind, these sort of equity conversations and all that, soon they will become the norm as opposed to the exception. And I think that's what the goal is to make this normalizing equity, normalizing humanity and dignity for everybody that we're dealing with in the public sphere. So I think if we just keep this up, that will happen.
Thank you so much for that. I just threw this back on here. This was a mural that was put up actually last year in the wake of the Black Lives Matter protests up in Ottawa. It actually, unfortunately, it blew away because it's on some construction scaffolding, but I think this is a good note to kind of end it on. So this part of the mural no longer exists, but it used to stand on Bank Street, and these are lyrics from Kendrick Lamar's All Right. But when I saw it being put up, it actually just resonated quite a bit with me, because it was a hard year, and we've all lived through it. And it was just a reminder every time I go for my little walks here in Centertown that, it could be all right. And I think in terms of transportation equity, there is a lot of work to do, and I don't want to underscore that. And I think, as all of the panelists have mentioned, sometimes it can be discouraging, but we gotta keep trying, and we gotta keep moving the needle. And one step forward is still one more step forward than it was the day before, right? And it's better than staying in the same place or even moving laterally. So thank you so much to all of our speakers here today. Thank you so much for the attendees. Apologize, we went a little bit over time, but I think these are such important conversations and we covered some great topics. And I hope that the folks who were in the audience today have something to think about, and also maybe folks to talk to if this inspired any conversations or anything else that you may want to discuss in your own municipality or things that you're thinking about. And really appreciate everybody's time here today. So thank you so much for being here. Inga, Jessica, Shrikar, Matt, thank you. And thank you again to all of us who joined. Okay, hope you have a great afternoon or remainder of your morning, regardless of wherever you are, and take care.